The Golden Triangle. In China in 1949, the Communists under Mao Zedong drove out the U.S.-backed nationalist warlord Chiang Kai-shek with his defeated army, the KMT, the Kuomintang. They fled to the Golden Triangle and to Taiwan. Within the Golden Triangle, they took over opium production to finance weapons purchases and the finer things in life. By the 1950s, heroin had become a nationwide concern in the United States. From Senate hearings to popular movies, criminologists blamed addicts for soaring crime rates. These KMT operations were hidden from the U.S. public for 30 years, and it is only recently Afghanistan has captured 90% of the world heroin market. The U.S. exploited the Hmong and Montagnard tribesmen as a source of opium and used the CIA's Air America to bring in guns and supplies in exchange for drugs. Large quantities of heroin appeared in the United States, much of it smuggled inside the bodies of dead American GIs. Addiction plagued the Army in Vietnam to the point of reducing their fighting capacity, and after the war these men brought their drug problem home with them. The U.S. government promoted the drug traffic and intervened to make sure traffic would not be discovered. In the words of one former investigator, quote, "You'd be running a criminal investigation, say narcotics. You'd find out that Inspector so-and-so of your national police is involved in this. You investigate up to a point and you can't go any further. It would go to our headquarters and then it would go to Washington, and nothing would ever happen. The intelligence gleaned from these people was more important than stopping the drug traffic." The senior public relations man for the DEA offers the explanation, quote, "Their mission was to get people to fight against the communists, not to stop the drug traffic." Iran-Contra. A secret program by the Reagan administration circumvented Congress and illegally sold weapons to Iran, a terrorist nation, in order to pay for a guerrilla war against the Sandinista Nicaraguan government. When the operation was uncovered, it also uncovered an off-the-books operation that, in the words of Senator Daniel Inouye, was a secret government with its own permanent funding mechanism and its own Army, Navy, and Air Force. The exposure of the Iran-Contra operation revealed the tip of the iceberg. Admiral Richard Secord ran a many-faceted program that concentrated on banking fraud, drug smuggling, and illegal arms dealing by officers and former officers of the U.S. military. Oliver L. North, a Marine lieutenant colonel, was assigned to the National Security Council staff beginning in 1981 until he was fired in 1986. North was the White House official most directly involved in secretly aiding the Contras, selling arms to Iran, and diverting Iran arms sales proceeds to the Contras. North was Deputy Director for Political Military Affairs and reported to his superior National Security Advisor, Robert C. McFarland, and later John M. Poindexter. He claimed to have taken much of his direction from Central Intelligence Agency Director William Casey. North testified repeatedly that he believed President Reagan was aware and approving of his activities. North was indicted in 1988 on 16 Iran-Contra charges. He was found guilty on 3 counts. His convictions were vacated in 1990 when an appeals court found that witnesses in his trial were prejudiced by his immunized congressional testimony. Many figures that came under criminal investigation and prosecution in Iran-Contra, like John Poindexter, Elliot Abrams, Richard Armitage, Dick Cheney, Otto Reich, Colin Powell, and John Negroponte, returned to serve in both Bush administrations without serious challenge from Congress. The Contras and the Crips. A San Francisco Bay Area drug ring sold tons of cocaine to the Crips and Blood street gangs of Los Angeles, funneled millions in profits directly to the Contra guerrillas, run by the Central Intelligence Agency. This drug network opened the first pipeline between Colombia's cocaine cartels and the black neighborhoods of Los Angeles, a city now known as the crack capital of the world. Gary Webb broke the story that no other major newspaper would run, and was found murdered in what can only be described as a staged suicide. The Nugan Hand Bank in Australia was the scene of one of the largest bank frauds in history up to that time in 1980. The investment firm was set up in 1973 by covert intelligence assets from the United States, and the board staffed by prominent U.S. admirals, generals, colonels, and William Colby, former head of the CIA. These men used their prestige to solicit investment by wealthy businessmen in Hong Kong and Australia. The selling point was to evade paying taxes. However, the real practice was a type of pyramid scheme. These millions were never invested, but instead used to purchase weapons and trade them for heroin in the Golden Triangle in order to finance ongoing operations outside of legislative or even executive control of the elected U.S. government. Branches of the banking front were opened on several continents to move weapons, drugs, and money between drug producers, customers, and covert wars in South Africa, Central America, Iran, and other places. Corrupt foreign leaders such as Ferdinand Marcos, as well as drug lords in the Golden Triangle, were actively courted by Nugan Hand participants such as General Leroy J. Maynor, former CEO of the U.S. bases in the Philippines. The Stewart Royal Commission that investigated the billion-dollar fraud functioned largely to cover up the nature and intent of the crime. When this house of cards collapsed, the two owners were allowed time to flee. Michael Hand, the former Green Beret and intelligence asset, formerly of Air America, disappeared, while Frank Nugan was found murdered in what was covered up as a suicide. In 1975, CIA team leader Theodore Shackley issued an ultimatum to the Australian intelligence services that their relationship would end if the Australian Prime Minister continued to question the CIA's influence in Australian internal affairs. 3 days later, the Governor-General, John Kerr, a man with extensive ties to CIA-front organizations such as the Asia Foundation, going back many years, dismissed the elected government and the elected leader, Whitlam, in a constitutional coup.